Nice.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is EzekielRage, and I'll be your host tonight. With me, we have Lu, who is a very close friend of mine, and he is drawing the webcomic piece of me, which I sometimes happen to write, which brings me to the topic of today's session, writing. Now, in this
Also,
session...
hello, I'm Lu.
Shut up, Lu. Nobody
Sorry.
likes you. In this session, we talk about writing specifically for games, although there will be some other things cropping up as we go along. This is a moderated AMA. That means you just ask the questions you have, if you have questions in the chat, and Lu will ask these questions whenever he thinks time is ready. There is a short rundown we have, so if your question is not asked right away, don't worry. He will ask it at the given moment, and if we somehow, for whatever mysterious reason, skip your question, there will always be a full Q&A at the end, I hope.
Right.
So, Lu, let's talk
Right.
about your stuff for a minute, because you are doing webcomics.
I do.
Now is
I
the
happen
time to
to-
plug them.
Yeah. So let's get this out of the way first, I guess. I happen to write and draw the webcomic piece of me, which you can find at pomcomic.com. That's pomcomic.com. It's a silly slice of life, absurd comedy strip that updates twice a week about pretty much everything and nothing, including video games. So I do happen to know a little bit about those. And yeah, that's about it. What about you?
And I'm EzekielRage. I create indie games, as you can see on your screen right now. This is a trailer show, some images from my games, some images from the comic Lu talked about. I also have a comic of my own, that's void-comics.com. But as said, this stream is mostly going to focus on games, writing for games. And this is important. This stream will contain spoilers for the Assassin's Creed series, Zelda Breath of the Wild, the most recent Tomb Raider games, some Dark Souls spoilers, a little bit of World of Warcraft, and the TV show Lost. So if you're sensitive to spoilers and don't want to get any spoilers with any of these topics, I mean, I chose games and stuff that's not completely new, so continue at your own risk.
Yeah, we will announce, though, as soon as spoilers will crop up, so just so you know.
Well, at least we hope to announce it. Probably we're just gonna mention the name and move on with it.
Probably,
Now,
yeah. We're just idiots like that.
Let us begin. The first
Right.
topic at hand is introduction to writing. And it may sound simple, but what exactly qualifies as writing, right? Just writing a bit of dialogue or thinking up a plot, that's not really writing. That's like saying, well, I sit in a car, that's not driving, you know? Writing is more than just filling the page or writing down a ton of words. Writing needs to come together as a one. Whatever it is, if you write a blog, if you write for a game, you need to have a specific mindset when you write something. Now, of course, if you're new to writing, if you think about writing for a game or creating a game, and you have never done anything like this, don't worry, you're gonna learn eventually. And with that, I wanna talk about creating games from a beginner's point of view, because I think that might be important, and it is related to the topic. You have to know that whatever it is you do, if you create an indie game, if you just write the story for a game, whatever you do in the beginning, it's not gonna be very good. You may think you have the best idea, you may think you have the best plot, the best characters, but you have to accept the fact that your first few attempts at anything are probably not gonna be very good.
Indeed.
And as such, I think, to me, what qualifies as writing is if you put enough work and thought into a project and keep working on it, keep refining it, that the process itself is what I call writing. So if it's just like, I have an idea and you jot this down, you haven't really written a script or for a game, you just wrote down an idea. Some people may say that already qualifies, but I tend to disagree. And well, of course, what I say is not the be-all, end-all, obviously. But this is about me talking about writing, so, you know. So, anyway, with that out of the way, let's start with our real first big issue. And that is something that comes up a lot, and I'm probably going to linger on this a bit. Your medium, in this case games, is not a bubble. Now let's be real here. And just know that I'm not dissing any games, right? But most games have mediocre writing at best. People usually say, wow, game X is amazingly written. But they usually compare it to other games. And this is not something we should do for the sake of the medium. Because we compare movies to books. We compare comic books to books or to movies. We compare all these different types of mediums. But we should compare games to these mediums as well. And if you do that, you will quickly realize that most games are simply not very well written. Now, again, I'm not dissing any games here. Some of these games I'm going to mention are very amazing games that I really, really love. But a great example for that is The Last of Us, which is hyped beyond belief. People love the game, and they say it's amazingly written and has great characters. But the fact of the matter is that The Last of Us, as great as it is, and I'm not dissing the game, again, the story is a B-movie zombie plot at best, and the characters, while not bad, are not better or more amazing than other characters in other mediums. Of course, if you compare it to video games, it's amazingly written, but you shouldn't do that, because you will never get beyond what games are now if you do that.
Right. So what you're essentially saying is that you shouldn't hold video games to their own standards. You should apply the same standards to all kinds of media. That's
basically what I'm saying. Yes. A great way to compress that down.
Yeah. Sum it up.
Yeah. And that the point is you should invite comparison to other medium, and that is important because games have something that no other medium has. Right. Games are special because they're the only medium where you can be bad at. You can't be bad at watching a movie, right? The movie is just gonna keep playing. You can't be bad at reading a book. Book suddenly doesn't stop and asks you to write an essay about it before you can continue. The book just keeps on going, right? And the game, usually games are supposed to be played, and if you are not very good at them, they will keep content from you until you get better. And if you write a game, this is something you have to keep in mind. And I think if you look at games like the aforementioned The Last of Us, this is a game that unfolds like a movie, that unfolds like a book, where there's a continuous thread of everything. But if you just suck at the shooting segments, for example, you're never going to see it.
Right.
And I'm going to bring this up a lot. The latest Zelda game is a very good example of how to do it right. Because even if you're not very good at fighting, most of the plot, most of the story, most of the characters can be experienced even if you're not very good. So this is a good thing. And this is something that's effective in conveying the message, conveying the story. Any questions so far? I hope not.
So far, we didn't get any questions, but as a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and I will relay them to Ezekiel as soon as I see fit. Or as soon as they fit into the overarching themes and stuff. You get the idea.
The two of us and the word fit, it kind of doesn't match really.
Indeed.
Neither of us is very fit, I think. Well enough.
You know what I mean.
Now, I bring this up because it's a topic I actually had yesterday. There are people out there who want to start with whatever they're doing, and they usually think they're not good enough. They're not talented enough. They, need to get better first, need to do stuff first. Don't do that. Don't think like that. Because if you
Yeah.
do that, you will never start with anything, because you will realize that you're never good enough.
Exactly. There's this. Sorry, I'm just gonna bring this up. There's this saying that perfection is the enemy of good, or it's the opposite of good. Because if you strive for perfection before you even begin, you're never ever going to begin or get finished in any way.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. That's pretty much what I wanted to say, right? I mean, I get this a lot when I'm asked what I do for a living. The answer is usually something evasive, because I don't want to talk about it in public.
Mm-hmm.
And usually when it comes to that topic, people more or less assume that, wow, you must be very talented.
Mm-hmm.
That is not needed or necessary at all, really. Only 10% of everything you do in art is talent. And if somebody says otherwise, please let me explain. The thing is, you only need 10% talent, because the other 90% is you doing what it is you need to do. It's 30% repetition. It's about 30% repetition. That means you keep practicing. You just keep writing whatever it is you write. Or if you're drawing, you just keep drawing until the movement of the hand gets better, right? But 60% is research and training. 60%, you need to do your research. You need to do your training. You can't draw great humans if you have no idea about anatomical things, So you need to do your research on that. And it's the same thing in writing. Research does not mean that you just sit down and watch a Star Wars movie and be like, oh, I did my research on that. No, that's not research. Research means, do you know the structure of the story? Do you know how the story is made? What does the story convey? Which parts are there and why are they not there? It's theoretical research you need to do. And sure, you can just read a lot of books and see how they do it. But if you don't understand why they do it, you can never surpass them, right?
Speaking of that, we've got an interesting question by SW Carousel, and I hope I'm asking this at the right point now. He asks, "I'm afraid if I refine the story for too long, it will feel false or less organic. What's a good point to stop refining?"
Yes, that is actually a very good question. And I just hope that SW Carousel is a guy, otherwise you just used the wrong pronouns. And I hate to be the one to bring this up, but
Sorry about that. I'm tired.
Yes, we really are.
My bad.
Now, that is actually a good question, because you are at least partially correct. If you don't stop at a certain point, things will get worse. And what I can give you as a quick tip is to just stop at 4 to 5 rewrites. Usually you rewrite whatever it is you're writing, and at one point you just tell yourself, all right, this is the point I stop. To me, it's 3, right? After 3 changes, 3 rewrites, I just stop. Usually that means there's another small rewrite in terms of dialogue when everything falls into place. But the overall thing is I stop at 3, because there is no real way for you to know. You don't look at what you did and say, wow, this is much worse than my previous version, I should go back. You can't decide that. It's usually other people that decide these things. But if you're an indie dev, if you're writing comics on your own or short stories on your own, you don't have other people to rely on, so you have to do it yourself. So just stop at 3 or 4 rewrites, whatever feels great for you. And another great tip I can give you is just let it rest, right? Don't look at it for at least a month. Because that will give you a fresh perspective, it will give you fresh eyes. Now, I know this is a lot of time. You're probably thinking, well, what am I supposed to do during this month? I need to publish this now. And you can publish it now. But in a month, when you look at it, you will see things that you wish you wouldn't have done. Or maybe you will see things and say, wow, this is amazing, I'm glad I published it. That could be. But it will be amazing a month later anyway. So waiting a month is always a good idea. Stopping after the 3rd or 4th attempt is always a good idea. And if that if none of these things work out for you, then maybe you need to take a step back and evaluate why it didn't work in the first place. I hope that answers that question.
Anyway, thank you very much, SW Carousel, for your question.
And if it didn't answer the question, just ask it again in Q&A later on. Or tell me what I did wrong, because I really want to, help you. All right. With that being said, I think we should move on to the storytelling principles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in writing, right, there's something we call tropes. Now, tropes is something that crops up a lot. Basically, it means things that appear all of the time. Now, please don't mistake that for a cliche, because that is not the same thing. A trope is a trope. It's something positive because it just works always, while cliches just get tired. And the biggest trope in writing is obviously the 3-act structure. The 3-act structure exists for a reason, and one simple reason is it works. And the reason it works is because this is how our brains kinda are tuned to that point. The 3-act structure actually can be found in more than just stories. You also can find it in music, for example, in songs and in full albums. And that is very interesting because a lot of my favorite albums, the first few songs are amazing. Then it just twiddles around for a little bit, and in the end, it's always a nice closure. And that is basically the 3-act structure in a nutshell, right? Act 1, in this case, is the most important. Because in Act 1, the reader, the gamer, the viewer, whatever, is still immersed into whatever it is you push on them, right? So in Act 1, you can do things that are as obscure as you want. In Act 1, people will buy it. If you fail to do that because you want a mysterious twist in the end or something, a lot of the time, people will not be on board with it. A lot of the time, they will say, that came out of nowhere, and it sucks.
Yeah, exactly. Just like establish everything you need to establish in Act 1 and be done with it.
Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be obvious about it. You don't have to be very obvious about it. I take the TV show Lost, for example, right? It opens with a plane crash. And at this point, plane crash, everything is as you would expect. There's a plane crash, people are screaming, there's a lot of blood, alright. And then everything settles down a bit. And the first act ends with this mysterious creature roaming through the jungle, being loud and breaking down trees and everything, right? This is the very first act of the very first episode. So in this first act, it was already established that there is some mysterious stuff going on. It's very vague. You don't know anything what this mysterious stuff is. All you know, but at this point, is this is mysterious. And everything's said and done. Everything that comes afterward, you already believe because we established there's mysterious stuff going on. If you're too concrete about it, it quickly becomes boring because people know. All right, let's just say if you would reveal the monster in the first episode, then every single time the monster shows up, people wouldn't really care much.
Yeah, because the suspense is gone.
Exactly. So you can be very vague about that. Now, Act 3 is where you have to tie everything together. It is what most people remember. It may or may have not happened to you watching a movie, reading a book, or playing a game that it was actually not that good, but the ending was just amazing, so people talk about it. Right?
Right.
And so basically, if Act 1 and Act 3 are great, Act 2 is more or less, it's not pointless, but it's just there to be there. You shouldn't put ultra important things into Act 2. A story must work without the second act. Now, that doesn't mean that Act 2 is not needed and you can just do 2 acts, because Act 2 exists to calm us down, to help us digest what just happened, give us room to breathe. This is usually where you put in some character revelations or set up things for the third act, because a lot of the time, this is when people, it's about an hour into the movie, some guy has to go to the bathroom. Other guy looks at his watch and be like, "Oh yeah, I hope the movie is not too long." In Act 2, people get, I think, tired is the right word. So Act 2 is usually where you can add in filler if you need to. You can add in various things that don't fit into anywhere else. You just have to make sure that it makes sense in the context of the story.
Right. That's why for example, that's why most fighting scenes take place in Act 2 in superhero movies, for example.
Exactly, because fighting is awesome, but it's not.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't do anything or not much at all for a story in and of itself. I'm Afroskeleton asks something. At what point is something over-explained in Act 1 or 3?
Well, spoiler alert for Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which people love to praise, but in my opinion is a rather poorly constructed movie. Not because it's bad, the actors are not bad, special effects are not bad. This is not bad. But the writing is doing a lot of things wrong. Because the first act, and I'm gonna get to over-explaining in Act 1 in a bit. Let's talk about Act 3 for a second. The first act in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is completely pointless. It's 100% pointless, you do not need it.
Mm-hmm.
So every chance you get to explain the setup is wasted. Because you don't need to explain the setup anymore because it's a sequel. But you should explain the setup of your movie right now. I mean, you could argue that the opening with Kurt Russell, when he drives down with Peter Quill's mom, and that is important, but really it isn't, because they're showing that partially again in Act 3. So in Act 3, what basically they realized is, wow, we don't have a movie, we don't have a story, all we have is some character interaction. So in Act 3, they just dump everything on you. Every single piece of exposition, every single thing you need to know to understand the plot happens in Act 3. This is over-explaining in Act 3, because all these elements could have easily been explained during the first act and the second act if they just cut out some of the jokes.
Right.
And so if Act 3 basically is just one piece of exposition after another, you're clearly overdoing it. As for Act 1, it's a similar thing. If Act 1 is so complicated that you usually the sins of writing are, at least in movies, opening narration, reading, and a shit ton of, sorry for the language, flashbacks. So if your movie opens with some flashbacks, plus reading, plus narration, you're over-explaining it. A great example for that would be the movie Gods of Egypt. People didn't like that movie for weird reasons, but what they actually should have criticized is the fact that the movie opens with explaining what the world is, explaining what the gods are, explaining what the humans are doing, explaining who the characters are, and explaining virtually everything you need to explain to actually understand the next 10 minutes. This is over-explaining in Act 1.
By the way, are we done with Guardians of the Galaxy 2 spoilers?
Yes,
because
we are.
Liam sorta... Right.
We are done.
Right.
So basically, if you keep explaining things, if it is so overly complex that you need to explain things in the beginning and in the third act, change the way the story progresses, or just cut out a few things. I hope that answers that question.
And if it does not, please feel free to ask again.
And tell me why it didn't answer your question. That is important.
Yeah, that would help.
If you don't tell me what I'm doing wrong, then I, can't change, obviously.
Right.
Now,
anyway, where were we?
I have no idea, to be honest. Let's just keep moving to the next part, which is something that I talk about a lot. It's having an ending versus making it up as we go along. Now the thing is, and I want to talk about my own things now, especially the comics part. And this is not to plug my comics. Of course, you can always check them out at void-comics.com for free, obviously. But this is more about telling about the way I work, because I am a guy. I always have an ending in mind when I do something. So when I write, I always know how it's going to end. And to me, this is important because if you have an ending, right, you may be more rigid in what you can do, but you're also much more focused with the story. You can very clearly see if a part is needed or not, because you know how it ends. Is this needed to understand the overall story and the ending? If the answer is no, cut it out. If something is missing, put it in. On the other hand, if you just make it up as you go along, which is clearly what they did with the Star Wars movies, no matter what George Lucas says, same goes for Harry Potter. Sorry, I really like. Actually, I'm not a big Star Wars or Harry Potter fan, but I like what they did in concept, but they're just making it up, and that's obvious. But it's okay. I mean, making it up as you go along allows you to do more things, elaborate more on certain things. On the other hand, it can make it impossible to tie things together, right? And now we're going back.
Exactly.
Now we're going into spoiler territory for Lost. Now, if you don't care about Lost, that's fine. But if you kind of want to see it and have no idea what the fuss is all about, spoilers for Lost. Now, Lost, the thing is, when they started Lost, they had no idea where they were going. And it's quite obvious. They had basic concepts, right? They had a basic idea in the beginning, what they wanted to do, but that was about it. And having a concept is not the same thing as having an ending. Just like writing a few words down is not the same thing as actually writing. And the thing in Lost is the first 2.5 seasons is just, not really treading water, but they're introducing a lot of concepts and ideas and mysteries. And at this point, viewers start to ask themselves, is this ever going to be resolved? Now, at about the halfway point in season 3, the studio came to them and said, you get 6 seasons and that's it. And that's when they actually started working towards the end. And it's incredibly obvious. Like, you can see it from one episode to the other where they just started to know where they were going. It's the middle part of season 3, actually. There's this episode where they kill off 2 certain characters that everybody hates. And this episode marks the point where they start to basically get stuff done. They made most of it up as they went along for the first 2.5 seasons. And that clearly shows. But later seasons are more focused. Other characters are introduced that are very important to the ending. And I'm not saying that they had the final ending in mind, but they knew that this is basically it, right? And because they did that, because they were just treading water these first 2.5 seasons, there are still people to this day that are confused about the ending. Because they didn't set up the ending in the first 3 episodes. They just kind of went there. And that confuses people because, again, you need to establish things in Act 1. And a lot of things for the ending were not established in Act 1, but in Act 3.
Right.
And that was one of the mistakes they made. Which kind of ends this spoiler alert for Lost. And also ends this topic, I think.
All right.
All right, then. Let's move on to something that is very important, and it is something I've been following James Gunn on Twitter, right? And he's the writer and director of Guardians of the Galaxy and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, he's a nice guy, obviously. He's very talented and very good at what he does. And there was, before the movie came out, a lot of questions on Twitter, people asking him what the plot is like, how he goes about creating a plot. And he kept telling people that the characters are the plot. And a lot of people didn't understand that, so I think I should explain that. There's well, people say there's 7 stories and they've all been told, but if you take a step back, there's actually 2 different ways to tell a story. It's plot-based versus character-based, right? And I'm talking a bit about movies now before I transition back into games, because I think talking about movies makes it easier to understand.
Right.
A plot-based story is usually a story where the plot just unfolds and our characters are along for the ride. Characters don't really have much influence on the story except maybe the end where they start to actually do stuff. Whereas in a character-driven plot, everything is about the characters. Everything. Every single step they take, every single thing they do is basically the plot. Now, the easiest way to differentiate that is looking at the movie Titanic. Titanic is clearly plot-driven. Because no matter who these people are, no matter if Rose or Jack or whatever the other guys' names are, spoiler alert, in the end the ship is going to sink. Right? I mean, the movie is called Titanic. And the ship is going to go down, obviously. The characters are just along for the ride, and it's nice to watch them. Maybe you like a love story. Maybe you just want to see people die in obscure ways by falling down ships or whatever. It's alright, I don't judge. But Titanic is clearly a plot-driven movie. While Lost, again, no spoilers here, is character-driven. The Mysteries of the Island is nothing more than mysteries of the characters on the island. The island is a character in itself, and most of the time you're just following characters, you're looking at their flashbacks, you're looking at their lives previously. Another good example would be Harry Potter for a character-driven story. Now, Harry Potter is just, to me it's weird, because Harry Potter is amazingly well written from a writing point of view. But it's amazingly bad from a story point of view. Because in Harry Potter, it's all about Harry, Hermione, and Ron, right?
Right.
Harry is the main character. He's the first thing we're introduced to as a little boy. We see him grow up. He is introduced to the magic world. As he learns, we learn. Everything we learn is when he learns it. But Harry doesn't do anything. Like, he's more or less, he's the chosen one, which is another trope that borders on cliche, but he doesn't really do much. In the first story, right? The big twist is that Harry had the Philosopher's Stone all along because he just had. He didn't do anything. Because he didn't do anything, he automatically got the Philosopher's Stone.
I was just about to say, didn't it just pop up at some point?
It just popped up because he's Harry. It's about him. It's about his story. And he needs to mysteriously make everything right, even if he doesn't do anything. This is clearly character-driven. Because in a regular plot, in a regular story, if it would be about the story, you'd be like, what the hell is this? And it's the same in all Harry Potter stories. I mean, the seventh Harry Potter, and I'm not gonna go into spoiler territories here, is the prime example of that. Everything is character driven, and without characters, it does not work. When plot driven, you're just along for the ride. I want to bring in Lu on this, right? Because from all we learned so far, Lu, please tell us, do you think, and here we go into more or less spoiler territories for Dark Souls. Lu, talk about Dark Souls for us. Is it plot-driven or is it character-driven, and can you explain why?
Dark Souls, I think, is definitely plot-driven. It's a very lore-heavy world, but the protagonist of this world, which is the player, obviously, is completely interchangeable. There's tons of different characters you can make, like as in character builds. You can make your character look whatever you want, but every character has to go towards the same goal, which is linking the first flame, which is established in the opening cinematic, more or less. It just begins with tasking the player to ring 2 bells of awakening, and then only after that it unfolds that you have to link the first flame, that you're the chosen one, which is more or less. I mean, you're not necessarily the chosen one. Actually, it's just very likely that you're the chosen one, which is another thing that Dark Souls does. But anyway, yeah, it is definitely a plot-driven game.
Right.
Absolutely.
I think so too. And another great example for plot-driven game would be World of Warcraft, the entire World of Warcraft series. Because events just happen around you and you are thrown into this world to play them. Now, you may think that if you do a story like that, you cannot have great characters, but you would be wrong. You can have great characters. I'll talk about that in a second, but next go into games with character-driven plots. And clearly examples for this would be The Last of Us, which, as I already established, the plot itself is B-movie, almost cliche. But since you like the characters, since you can connect and relate to the characters, for whatever weird reason you relate to serial killers, sorry, but, you know, you like it. You like the characters. Without the characters, there's no plot. Ellie is literally the plot of the game.
Pretty much, yeah.
Right? So this...
Yeah, so basically in a plot-driven story, the characters are not interchangeable, whereas in a character-driven story, the characters are not interchangeable, whereas in a plot-driven story, the characters are very much interchangeable.
I wouldn't go that far, but that is the basic gist of it, yes. I mean...
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah, for the most part. If you look into the Assassin's Creed games, and we're going to linger a lot on these, because not only I'm a huge fan, but they're also prime examples for everything I'm going to talk about next. Both good and bad. Don't get me wrong, I have a lot of criticisms with these games, especially in the writing department. I mean, Assassin's Creed 2 and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood are great examples of character-driven plots. Whereas Assassin's Creed Unity and Assassin's Creed Revelations are very, very bad examples. Because of reasons we're going to elaborate on later. You see, in Assassin's Creed 2 and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, what you do is you play as the characters, you're training with them, you're getting to know the characters. Ezio is basically, he's not setting the plot into motion, but he is the story of the whole trilogy, basically. You have him avenging the death of his father, you have him trying to figure out what's going on, you have him trying to rid the cities of the influence of the Borgia. And it's clearly a plot-driven game, clearly a character-driven game, but the background lore is plot-driven. And this is something, if you can do it well, you will have a great story. But most games, most stories cannot do this well. A good negative example would be, and I'm probably going to take a short break for a few seconds after that to catch my breath. A great example for how this doesn't work is Assassin's Creed Revelations and Assassin's Creed Unity. Because Unity, strangely enough, is plot-focused. But it tries to tell you it's character-focused, but it's not, you know. The characters are boring, they're interchangeable, and it's just a boring love story badly told in this huge setting of the French Revolution. But the real plot, the real story, is the French Revolution. Because everything that happens in the game is the French Revolution. Every Templar you have to assassinate was part of the French Revolution. And what they tried to do is they tried to weave it together, but they completely failed. And it does not help that a lot of the optional parts, and that is my next point, making a few things optional because you think that makes it okay, does not necessarily make it okay. Especially if, in the case of Assassin's Creed Unity, the optional parts directly contradict the main story.
And that's a great point to ask a question that we got from Liam, sorta. At what point does a plot become overly convoluted?
That kind of harkens back to over-explaining in Act 1 and 3. If you need to over-explain something, it's probably too convoluted. A great example for this would be Pirates of the Caribbean, the third one. I love that movie, but there's no denying that most people simply don't understand the character motivations at this point, because everybody is backstabbing everybody and everything is happening at once and nobody knows why.
Yeah.
And they are over-explaining everything. It's just way too complex. It's way too convoluted. And while I like that, that does not mean it's good. So
as soon as you need a lot of exposition, that's where you know you did something wrong.
Exactly, especially in a medium like games or movies, because these are audiovisual experiences. In a game, if you can explain something with gameplay, explain it with gameplay and not with a plot or story or whatever.
Show, don't tell.
Of course, if you're doing a visual novel, things obviously change. But in a visual novel, you still kind of have some sort of gameplay, even if it's just talking to the right person at the right time. And you can make it work by just putting the person into a different location, which tells you something about the location and the person. For example, the ending of what is old, but what can't be spoiled.
Everything can be spoiled, mate.
Yeah, true. But I think let's talk Star Wars, right? I mean, Star Wars is the thing, right?
Yeah, right.
If the ending of Episode 5 were not Darth Vader versus Luke on Cloud City, right? If it were, for example, say Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi's ghost talking in Mos Eisley Cantina or whatever, and just sitting there explaining, so you used to be Luke's father, and I never told Luke, and now you're trying to tell Luke, and yada yada, rambling on about it, nobody would care. But you don't need all these explanations, because at this point, you already have everything established, and the images speak for themselves. Luke's anguish can be seen in his face, and that is also what ruins the new version of the ending of Episode 6. In episode 6, in Episode 6, there's this scene where the Emperor tortures Luke, right? And Darth Vader looks at Luke, looks at the Emperor, looks at Luke, looks at the Emperor, and even though his face is completely motionless because it's a mask, you see the emotion, and he picks up the Emperor and throws it down the shaft. Now, in the new version of the Blu-ray, they added they cut out from Episode 3 for whatever weird reason, completely ruining that.
Absolutely.
We know what he's feeling.
God.
That was a horrible decision.
Yeah, it's another case of show, don't tell. Everybody knows just by seeing what he's doing. We know he's conflicted, but he chooses to betray the Emperor in favor of his son. That's
so basically
you just know it.
Basically, the more explanations you need, the over convoluted it becomes. So just cut that down a little. And I know it's hard, especially if you love a certain part of a story, but that's why I kept saying earlier, just let it rest for a month. If things need to go, they need to go. Now, you don't have to throw them away. You can keep them for another story, for another part. That's fine.
Yes.
But please just cut out stuff. So.
All right.
Where was I? Oh, right.
Assassin's Creed, I think.
Right. I was still with Assassin's Creed because this is really a great series to show the highs and lows of storytelling in video games. And I want to talk about Assassin's Creed Revelations, which basically has exactly the same problems as Assassin's Creed Unity. And that brings us to the next point, writing specifically for games. And I want you to know that I'm talking a lot about Assassin's Creed now. I'm going to go into some mild Breath of the Wild spoilers, but very mild. And there's going to be some Tomb Raider coming up for the new series, 2013. Now,
just let me know as soon as you get out of the spoiler territory, and I will relay that to the chat.
Of course, I will always just, give a warning beforehand. Now,
Obviously.
Assassin's Creed Revelations. This is spoilery. Assassin's Creed Revelations' main story is Ezio trying to find the Masyaf keys while falling in love with a woman named Sophia, who is linked to these keys. It's a great plot. It's very simple. It's very straightforward, right? But then, because the studio basically demanded that it has the same gameplay as the previous two, they had to have a B story about some Turkish assassin and Ottomans and gunpowder and treason, whatever. It's very convoluted, basically, because the two plot lines don't mesh well. The B story does not mesh well with the story that was put in, but gameplay demanded it. And there's two simple solutions to that: either better writing, or different writing in that case, or better game design. And the same goes for most RPGs, really. I mean, you have this great end of the world threat that is going to devour the planet, but I really need you to pick 5 apples for me, and you can only pick them from 5 special trees that are littered all throughout the world, because I really need those because I'm hungry.
There's always time for fetch quests for some weird reason.
Exactly. That is bad writing. I mean, if you set it up differently, and this is where we go into Breath of the Wild spoilers. In Breath of the Wild, they kind of did it right.
Right. I think that concludes the Assassin's Creed Revelation spoilers then.
No, I'm gonna go. It does, but I'm gonna loop back into that.
All right.
So I mean, in Breath of the Wild, spoiler alert. What they did was they had this world-ending threat with Ganon coming back and stuff, but they did it in a way that still allowed for fetch quests to take place, because everything you do in the game serves the purpose of making Link strong enough to actually face Ganon. And Ganon, while lingering as Doom on the horizon, is not here yet. He's still being kept in check by Zelda. So you can take the time to grow stronger until Zelda tells you it's over, you need to do it now. And of course that only happens exactly in the final fight. So this is a way to tie things together nicely. You can have your fetch quests, but you can also have your world-ending story. It just has to make sense within itself. Link's fetch quests include, give me whatever, and I can make you stronger. And you need to be stronger to fight Ganon, because last time, and this is the spoiler, you were not strong enough, and Ganon bloody murders you. Technically, his robots murder you, but it's the same thing.
Right.
And you would not want that to repeat. Now, this also ties into an earlier thing I talked about. Because in Breath of the Wild, you actually can collect memory fragments telling you what previously happened, right? And you can experience those even if you're bad at the game. Because at most points, all you need to do is reach a certain part of the world. You don't have to find this. You don't have to fight this huge boss. You don't have to slaughter 1,000 creatures. All you have to do is find one specific spot on the map. You're shown this spot in the picture, and you just have to go there, and the memory is triggered. Now, even if you die 50 times, you always spawn nearby, so you can, and you are marked on the map where you died, so you can avoid that place and get to this part of the map somewhere as in another way. And that is good, because it gives the story the meaning it needs, and also the player the freedom he needs. That is great writing in a video game. And now the plot for Breath of the Wild is your average Zelda plot, right? But if you play, of course it is. But if you play a Zelda game for the story, you really should rethink your priorities. And that concludes our Breath of the Wild spoilers.
Right.
And now we're back to Assassin's Creed Revelations.
All right.
I know, I'm going in circles here. In Assassin's Creed Revelations, if they would have cut out the parts about that need to be the same thing as in previous, like you need to buy shops and you need to help the assassins recruit more assassins. These things are only there because they were there in the previous game. That's the only reason. If they would have cut those out in gameplay parts, just focused on his Ezio's quest with the keys and Sophia, it would have been much better. It would have been much better. On the other hand, they could have changed the story to fit the gameplay elements better, because the story is haphazardly told. Basically, Ezio just inserts himself into these problems because that's kind of what he does. That's not a good story reason, right? Ezio's like, I really need to find these keys, but I think I have some time to travel to Cappadocia and look at the statues there. I mean, it's not literally what happens in the game, but this is the way it's presented. There's a subplot in the game where you have to follow a guy, and there's illegal weapon shipments and stuff like that. And all that amounts to is that Ezio meets the final bad guy in a different location than he would have if he would have just stayed where he was. It's completely unnecessary, and if they would have changed that part, if they would have made that part from a storytelling point of view make sense within the context of the story, then the other parts would not feel so out of place. If you make the story not about Ezio finding the Masyaf keys, if you make the story about Ezio finding the Masyaf keys, while he finds out that he has to intervene with the Templars here because it's directly related, that would have made much more sense. And you wouldn't need a pointless quest to Cappadocia. You wouldn't need just to, follow this guy around until you find the illegal weapon shipments. Anyway, I've been lingering this way too long.
A bit, yeah.
We end the Assassin's Creed part now. Thank heavens. Now, let's go back to an earlier thing. In Tomb Raider for 2013, right? And this is not a spoiler, it happens early in the game. So I'm not going to spoil the Tomb Raider games. Tomb Raider 2013 is famous for one scene. There was this term thrown around online called ludonarrative dissonance, and everybody was like, "Oh, I know what that means," and nobody really knew what it meant, right? Ludonarrative dissonance comes from ludo, which basically means playing, more or less, with Latin and stuff. And narrative is obviously the narration, the story, and the dissonance is something that doesn't quite fit together. Now, basically, what they meant was that, and that happens a lot in action games, right? It means that what you see on screen is not what you experience as a player. I mean, how often have you played an action game where you just take one bullet after another and you cower behind some knee-high wall for like 3 seconds and you're back at full health and you mow down thousands and countless of bad guys, and then there's a cutscene, and then you get hit by a rock and you fall down. That is ludonarrative dissonance. Basically, it does not fit together. And Tomb Raider is famous because they did that one scene where Lara has her first kill. It's very early in the game. It's not a spoiler. And she was like, "Oh, right, that was easier than I expected." And then she just starts to mow down people.
Wasn't it something else too? I think very early in the game, she feels sorry for having to murder a deer to survive.
Yes.
She even apologizes to the corpse.
Yes,
then she has her first kill and is really, really upset about it. And as soon as the cutscene ends, you just murder everyone.
Well, that's not necessarily true because after you kill the first deer, there are more solemn scenes with Lara, right? And she has her diary where she writes stuff down, and then there's the scene where she's attacked by wolves, and that scene is important because she has to kill the wolves as well to survive. So this transition is well done, but the problem with the cutscene with the first kill and then just mowing down 12 people is that after that scene where you mow down 12 people, there's another scene in a village where you literally do nothing but explore and maybe try to find some health pack and get it from some wolves. Now, if after her first kill, they would have cut out that part where she kills like a dozen other guys and jumped directly into the village,
that would have worked much better.
That would have worked much better because in the village there's only 3 bad guys, and you can choose to deal with them in different ways. So going from her first kill to the village scene would have simply eradicated that problem for most of the part. But since they chose to, because they had to do an action scene at this point, right?
Sure.
And this is another case of cut things out or write it differently. Now, in case of Tomb Raider is a prime example of where a writer is actually better than the game gives them credit for, because it's very clear that the writer actually had an idea that the writer wanted to go at a certain point. But you know how games are made, big budget games are made, right? Everybody has a say and things change constantly, and the writing just fell flat because of that. Because you can clearly see that various ideas and concepts were already introduced early on that would come into fruition later, or even in the sequel. The bad guys from the sequels are alluded to and directly you can read about them in the memo Laura finds in the first game. So somebody clearly knew what they were going to do, but game design, had a different idea.
Right.
And that basically sums up that part of the whole talk, as we are getting, into Act 3.
Right.
So, now I'm going to say something that may sound weird, but if you are still not asleep, you can listen to me explaining it. Writing is not game design, but game design is writing.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds weird, I know.
I mean, it doesn't sound weird to me, but yeah.
But you know me, that doesn't,
Right.
Basically, what you should do is you should write for the design and design for the writing. You put the focus where it needs to be. Do you really need that part of the story? Can it go? Do you really need that gameplay segment, or can it go? And this basically sums up everything I've talked about. I talked about so far, right? Know your story, know your design. If you're like me, no, you're probably not like me, but the way I develop games is, and if you look at the screen, you can clearly see the kind of games I develop. The way I develop games is I do gameplay first, story second. However, that does not mean that the story is the last thing I think about. It's just not the first thing I think about. The very first thing I think about is what type of game do I want to make. Then I prototype that. And during the prototyping process, I can already see how the gameplay flows, how everything works. And this is where, when I start writing the story is written as I develop the game. It's not written after I already developed the game. It's written as I develop the game, but the gameplay comes first. So basically what this allows me to do is I can already see if I need that part in the story or not.
Right. And at the same time, you can already see if the gameplay makes sense within the writing, within the world, within the context of the story or not.
Of course. I mean,
yep.
Of course, my games are much simpler than most other people's games, right? I've seen games. If you have games like Binding of Isaac, for example, and this is not really a spoiler because I have never played the game. I don't know anything about that game, but I don't think that in Binding of Isaac you'd have a ton of cutscenes every now and then explaining some really complex story. I think what they did is everything you need to know you see in the visuals. Because the visuals convey the story, the gameplay tells you, basically.
It's basically environmental storytelling plus gameplay reinforcing the themes, more or less. Also, there's the only two cinematics, if you can even call them that, because they're just scribbles for the most part, are the intro cinematic and the ending, or the endings, plural. So yeah, you would be correct in that department.
Yeah, that basically brings me to what we just saw on the screen. A game called Chibi Ninja-kun is the latest game I made. It's a very small Game Boy type platformer, right? And it only has an intro cinematic and an outro cinematic. However, I conveyed a certain sense of movement, a progression into the level design. As you move from the city, through a tower, through a forest area, into the temple of the bad guy, right? So there's no need for cutscenes. There's no need for anything. There is a plot there. There's a story there, and of course it's rather simple because it's a game, designed in the way that I would design a Game Boy game for children. But that does not mean that I don't have to think about these things.
Exactly.
And basically to tie everything together to make it whole again, right? We go back to what qualifies as writing. Did I write the story for Chibi Ninja-kun, or was it just a concept I threw out there? And the simple answer is both. I threw out the concept, I tried that, I tested that, and if the gameplay works the way I want it to work, I write the story based on that gameplay to progress through the game the way the story needs to be. And I didn't basically think about the game in the bubble of a game. I thought, is this something little kids would enjoy if it were a coloring book or a children's book or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the enemies in the game are designed that way. The progression is designed that way. And of course, this is a small example, right? A simple example.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be epic. It doesn't have to be amazing to be enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I think we can go to the final thoughts.
Right.
So, as we wrap this up, I hope some of you are still alive or, around or not asleep or whatever.
And or listening, yeah.
Yeah, right. That would also help.
Yeah.
This was basically just a basic rundown, right? You can't just say I covered everything. There's a lot I did not cover. Obviously, I never talked about dialogue. There's many reasons for that. One is that I know my weaknesses, and dialogue is usually one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you can talk forever about dialogue.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just the positive and negative examples you can take for hours. And this is not really something I think is required for now. However, if there is demand, I can talk about dialogue later on. As said, it was just a basic rundown. I hope it gives you some idea of where to start or where to rethink your story.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any questions, something I did not talk about, something I answered poorly or explained poorly, please, now is the time to do that while we look at these nice images on the screen.
Yeah. Actually, I do have a question.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I know. It's more of a. Do you have an I mean, it's also important that the gameplay obviously reinforces the writing and vice versa.
Obviously.
But it's also possible that to tell a story through gameplay or through the mechanics or something.
Of course.
Can you think of an example of a game that shows that nicely?
Well, if I say Assassin's Creed, you're going to hit me, are you?
Maybe.
Well, the game is called Assassin's Creed. And but what people don't understand is, it's not a real stealth game. Strawman here. But it's an argument I heard a lot, because it doesn't have a crouch button. But that's not the point. Especially the very first Assassin's Creed, not the others, not so much. But the very first Assassin's Creed is a prime example of that. Because it focused on social stealth. Right? You were supposed to be stealthy in social situations. And they did it better in the first one than in any of the other games. But that is gameplay enforcing the narrative. You're an assassin. You have 3 tenants, right? They start the game with 3 tenants. Hide in plain sight. Stay your blade from the flesh of the innocent. And don't compromise the order. This is basically the Assassin's Creed they've been talking about. So you hide between the people. You sit on benches. You talk to other people. Just to not be seen. If you kill innocent people, you're gonna die. Desynchronized, but it's the same thing. And you cannot ever enter or interact with other assassins or enter assassins' hideouts if you are followed by guards.
Which makes sense.
So these 3 tenets are actively reinforced through the gameplay, not as well as they could be, but I think it's a great example of a well-known franchise.
Mm-hmm. I've got another example, which would be Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, which tells most of its story actually through gameplay, even through the controls. So it's a really short game, maybe 2 or 3 hours if you blitz through it. But if you ever see it in a Steam sale or something, do yourself the favor and check it out. I love it, absolutely amazing. Some guy 616 asks, "What are your thoughts on environmental storytelling?"
Love it.
Absolutely.
For a game, it's my favorite way of storytelling. Dark Souls is a great example.
Yes.
My favorite example would be Metroid Prime.
Oh yes.
Because
yes.
Metroid Prime is just playing Metroid Prime, thinking about the things it does and why it does it, teaches you more about game design than I think I ever could.
Absolutely.
They did environmental storytelling perfectly. The environmental storytelling is better than the lore storytelling they're doing. In fact, if you can do environmental storytelling well, always do that, especially in games. Now, of course, there are people who do not understand that. I want to talk about Twilight Princess right now. I really need to talk about Twilight Princess because Twilight Princess is a masterclass in environmental storytelling, unlike most other games. And that is something most people don't realize until I explain it to them.
Which ties into the question that I Am Afroskeleton asks, how does environmental storytelling work? There we go.
Great. So, Twilight Princess is a very interesting game. Because it's basically, in terms of gameplay, it's just Ocarina of Time, but bigger. However, most of the storytelling is environmental storytelling. You're not told these things via cutscenes. This is why most people don't understand them. The world in Twilight Princess is desolate and empty. That's not because they couldn't afford the tech. Especially in the Wii U remaster, they could afford the tech. But they deliberately chose not to, because it's part of the storytelling. Hyrule is empty and bleak, because this is the way Queen Zelda governs. She's a centrist. Hyrule Town is brimming with life. It's beautiful, and there's a lot of environments and people and stuff like that, but everything outside is just empty and barren. You have the hidden village, which is literally empty. There's nobody there. The village died out because of the centrist policies of Zelda. Kakariko village is about to die out because of that. Orden village can barely make by only because they are good at raising cattle and pumpkins, right? So everything outside of Hyrule Town is neglected by Zelda, and it shows. Bridge of Hylia is breaking down. Elden Bridge, breaking down. All these things are breaking down because Zelda is a centrist and thinks that as long as people in Hyrule Town are happy, I'm doing a good job. And this is environmental storytelling. If you change that, if you put in a lot of trees and other stuff and maybe make it beautiful, it completely destroys that part of the game. So what you do is you have this bleak world where Zelda is not really that good of a ruler, being invaded by an evil worse force, which makes you kind of want to go back to your old life, but your old life basically is not much better. You're still a farm boy in the village that barely gets by, ruled by a queen who basically only focuses on one place, that is her town, because that's what she sees every day. Kakariko village, you save Kakariko village, but it's still going to die out because there's like 5 people living there.
At the most, yeah.
This is environmental storytelling. The problem is, and that's why I said Metroid Prime is a better example, in Twilight Princess it's so subtle that most people don't get it if I don't explain it to them. In Metroid Prime, it's not subtle. It's very clearly visible what's going on here. The Chozo Ruins, it's very clear what they are, right? They are completely different from everything else. They connect to all the other places. Whereas in Twilight Princess, if you don't think about it, you probably won't notice. Your brain does, but you won't. And I hope that answers that question.
Another great example would be, once again, Dark Souls. And sorry if I keep bringing this up. But
that's okay.
The world of Dark Souls is on the brink of an apocalypse, more or less. The Age of Fire is fading, and it's the first flame that keeps the world awake is about to go out. And it shows. The whole world of Dark Souls is desolate, is bleak, is on the brink of just crumbling. But you don't have to tell grand stories with environmental storytelling, not at all. Environmental storytelling also involves giving players hints as to what this place used to be, or what dangers lie ahead. For example, there's this one bridge in Dark Souls in Undead Parish that's charred. It's pretty much black. Corpses, like charred corpses, are lying around, and this should give you a hint that, all right, something happened here that involved fire, probably a dragon. And lo and behold, as soon as you enter the bridge and you're not careful, if you're not careful, a dragon will swoop in and kill you, basically. So environmental storytelling can also give players hints as to what lies ahead or what happened in this place.
I would even go a step further. If you can utilize environmental storytelling to more or less guide the player to the next objective. If it's
Oh,
more
absolutely.
open world, or if you can do it to signal to the player a gameplay element, you should do so. I mean,
Absolutely.
Because in my opinion, a tutorial in the beginning of a game that just tells you press A to jump, or hey, listen, press A to open a door, that's very, very bad design. First of all, I think most people know how to open a door. Second of all, if you can do it with environmental storytelling over tutorials, always do that. And I have to give props to Breath of the Wild in this. The fact that you're locked into the Great Plateau at the beginning of the game is the best tutorial you can have. Because in the Great Plateau, you can do everything you can do in the later game, just in a small testing area.
Yeah, it's a rather safe place to experiment.
Right, because there are no really super hard enemies, but they're tough enough for you to experiment with them. You can find some small weapons, some small equipment stuff. You can learn how to cook. Everything you need to know for the later game, you are taught in the Great Plateau without dialogue. It's just, this is your sandbox. Figure out whatever the hell you can do. And only if you figured out enough to actually leave the plateau, the game opens up. So that's great.
Right. Also, what constitutes to environmental storytelling is signposting to the player.
Not literal signposts you have to read.
Yeah, of course, but subtle signposting. Like focusing on Breath of the Wild again. Once you get out of the cave at the very beginning, you see a dude in the distance sitting at a campfire, and that should, and in 90% of the players, it does tell them, oh, this is a point of interest. I should check this out.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. I have a game upcoming called Citadel, the Legends Trilogy. It's already out on Wii U, and it will be out on PC, Mac, and Steam in July, maybe August. And there is the game has 3 different games in one. That's why it's called a trilogy. And the second chapter, I focus less on running through the world, and I focus more on slight riddles. And I use environmental storytelling for that, because the very first thing you see, the very first screen, there is a skeleton hanging on a cross. And unlike the other background elements, this skeleton is outlined, because in Citadel, everything that has an outline can be interacted with. The skeleton is outlined, and the only hint you get is free the 4. And you see 4 of these skeletons throughout the stage. And I think that gives you a hint what you're supposed to do.
Okay. I mean, I'm sure it makes sense once you're playing the game, but like explaining it like this is a bit weird. Oh well.
If you see the game, if you see it on the screen, it makes sense, because
it will make sense. Right.
This is what I mean. Writing is not design, but design is writing. I can explain this to you, but if you don't see the design I put into it, it does not make much sense. Yeah,
exactly. Also, you can put a lot of writing into your design. That's what you're saying, or you can convey a lot of themes or plot elements and stuff via design rather than just telling it to the player.
Long story short, if it can be designed, you don't have to write it.
Exactly. And you don't have to explain it via text or via dialogue or something, which is always more elegant than just an exposition dump. If at all possible, show, don't tell. Always.
I agree. So, if we don't have any more questions, I think we should wrap it up.
We could, yeah.
Well, once again, I thank you all for being here for this basic rundown of what I think writing is about. Now, as said in the beginning, whatever I think is not the be-all, end-all of things, but serves me pretty well for the last few years. So I think a few years' worth of experience really helps.
It sure does.
I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank everybody who watches this later, not in the stream, but on YouTube. My name is EzekielRage. I am a writer and game developer, indie dev. I create games like the Chibi Ninja-kun, what you just saw, or Gravity Plus, which you can see the logo right now, games for Wii U and PC. And I also eventually write, no, eventually is the wrong word. I also write, language barrier. I write void-comics.com, superhero comics that are free to read for you. You can check that out. And over to Lou.
Yeah, as he just mentioned, my name is Lou. I draw and write a webcomic called Piece of Me, which you can also find at pomcomic.com. And yeah, I'd say that's pretty much it. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you so much for your questions. Those were some great questions.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It was really great. And
yeah,
if you have questions, right, I forgot. If you have questions about that, if you like what you're seeing, if you wanna talk to me, you can always hit me up on Twitter at @RealEzekielRage. I'm also, of course, in the GDN Discord channel with my handle EzekielRage. And other than that, my contact data is on my website, EzekielRage.com, or my comic book website, boycomics.com. So if you want to talk with me about anything related to that, you can always do so. I'm very happy to talk with you.